You're listening to The Peach Pit, and my guest today is none other than a legend. He is a bass player and composer known for reinventing the way people think about solo bass. He has toured the world. He's played with some of the greatest musicians I can think of. I mean, just off the top of my head, you got Jeff Loomis, Jim Matthias, Alex Skolnick, Michael Hedges. He studied at Berkeley. He studied with, what's that guy's name again? Oh, yeah, Jaco Pastorius. So if you think you know everything a bass guitar can do, prepare to meet your final boss because my guest today is none other than Michael Manring.
Well,
Michael, thank you so much for taking time to talk to me and welcome to the pit.
thank you so much for that very kind introduction, Derek. I very much appreciate it.
I appreciate you taking time to do this. I know you're a busy guy, and I'm really, really excited to kind of pick your brain. I've gone through a lot of your other interviews, so there's certain things that I won't be asking you because I know that you've talked about them ad nauseum. So, anyone listening to this today, you want to know about his hyperbase, go listen to one of those interviews. He's told everybody everything there is to know about his hyperbase. We're going to skim over that. I thought a fun place for us to begin is really simple. Just what have you been listening to lately?
Oh, my listening habits are a little strange. Um, I I don't have any preference for genres. I suppose there's a few genres I don't listen to very often, but I'm kind of all over the map um, in terms of that. So lately, I've been kind of doing a deep dive into Brahms and just studying a lot of Brahms music as a good student of composition should. But I also was listening to a lot of sort of newish pop music to just kind of see what's going on out there. I found a list that somebody had said that they of a bunch of pop tunes they thought were really good that had been released in the last 10 years, and I was just listening through to all those. I'm sorry I don't remember most of the names, but um, yeah. And anytime I hear somebody say this is cool or interesting or even um, remarkable in some way, I'll usually give a listen and just see what it's all about. So that's kind of how most of my listening goes. There's usually a few things that I'm listening to, um, kind of either personally or academically, and then a bunch of things I just want to hear what's going on out there.
I think that's a hard thing for musicians to kind of explain to people is that sometimes we listen to music that we don't like just to understand it.
Yeah, it's really important, and um, in fact, I I don't really think that much about music I like and don't like. There's this odd phenomenon that I find myself in often as somebody who's fascinated by composition. There are a bunch of pieces I absolutely adore, but don't really want to listen to them that much. When I think of there's some things that Karl-Heinz Stockhausen did that absolutely brilliant, and it's amazing to read about them and kind of study the structure, but it's not something I would put on Sunday evening, when I'm just relaxing at home.
Right, yeah, but it's like you said, it's sort of like an academic sort of pursuit at the same time, right?
It is. I guess that word is a little charged. For me, I love learning about things. So for me, for something to be academic is not really a bad thing. It just means that I'm using more of that part of my brain than another part of my brain. But I value both parts of my brain.
I actually wanted to go back because I've listened to you talk in other interviews just shortly about Harry Parch.
Oh, awesome.
And you mentioned that you discovered Harry Parch really early on in your musical journey, and I just kind of wanted to crack that egg open and see, like, so how did you discover Harry Parch, and how do you think that might have kind of changed your trajectory as a musician?
Oh, thanks for asking that. I hope your listeners will be interested in this because it's a pretty little obscure arm of music. But you're absolutely right. Completely changed my trajectory. That's a really good way to put it. So, I've always been a music nerd and just wanted to know as much about music as possible. So, when I was a teenager, I spent a lot of time in the local library, and I think I read all the books about music they had in the library. And a lot of those were about I was especially interested in like the contemporary music uh, that was happening at the time. So yeah, this was in the 70s. So we're talking about kind of everyone from, say, Stravinsky through John Cage up to Philip Glass was the enfant terrible, I guess, at the time, a new and exciting figure at the time. And in one of these books was talking about various composers and didn't have a section on, but just had a picture of Harry Parch and a caption. And the caption was, "This is Harry Parch." I won't quote it directly. I'm sorry, I can't remember it exactly. But this is Harry Parch, who rejected the conventional way of making music and instead came up with a system where he divided the octave into 43 tones. Our conventional octave is divided into 12 tones. And thus he created all his own instruments and his own way of composing. And here he is playing one of his instruments of his own design. And that kind of blew my head off right there. Just that tiny little description about Harry Parch. And I couldn't find much more about him. But the local record store, I was able to go there and order one of his records. His music's so obscure, obviously, they didn't have any of his music in stock, but I was able to order one of an album of his. And one of the things that was delightful is I really loved it, just enjoyed listening to it, kind of like what we were talking about later. The theory that he was using seemed it must be very interesting, but just putting on the record is really cool. It was really fun to listen to. And fortunately, Parch was kind of an amazing guy. He did he did write down all of his theory and kind of explicated the whole process in an amazing book called Genesis of a Music. And I couldn't afford to buy a copy for many, many years, but I later on, when I moved to New York, they had a copy in the library at the Brooklyn Public Library that I kept checking out over and over because I have to keep rereading it, this book, because it's pretty dense and pretty complex. But yeah, it really gave me this sense of thinking about music in new ways, and it gave me a hero who was completely unafraid to really take things as far as his muse wanted him to take them. So he's became a hero at that point. A little bit of a strange guy. There's several documentaries about him that you can see online, and a little bit weird.
Yeah.
But that idea of really not compromising in the pursuit of creativity really spoke to me a lot. And his ideas about um, how our system of intonation, how we tune things in Western music, really became a powerful influence on me, and has remained such. I'm still studying this process. But that was a big impact too. As it turns out, I don't think Parch really was the person who really solved the riddle about tuning music. I think probably Ben Johnston was probably had uh, a little bit better way of thinking about tuning and how tuning works. Ben Johnston actually was a student of Harry Parch. He was his assistant for a while, so that all kind of makes sense. Um, but that way of thinking about music became a really important part of my conception.
Well, it seemed like it because, like you said, as soon as you got your bass, you took it home and you started just messing with the tuning.
I did. I did. It's a little bit complex here because there's a few different things we're talking about. There's a standard way you tune basses and guitars so that that all the notes are in where you expect them to be. But you don't have to tune them that way. You can tune them to anything. In fact, they tend to go out of tune very often, whether you like it or not. And so you can leverage that process, and doing so is actually kind of amazing. That sends you off into a different world that's a little different from this other world of tuning we're talking about, but there's a big overlap in that Venn diagram. This other aspect of tuning has to do with um, the notes we have and when they're really kind of naturally in alignment with each other. So if you have two notes together, what does it really mean for them to really have a natural alignment to each other? And how, more importantly than that, actually, is how that makes us feel, we react to that.
It sounds like you're kind of talking about like the tuning problem with like I've been in a choir and I've listened to the conductor say like tune your thirds like naturally, don't listen to the piano, that sort of a
Exactly.
thing.
Exactly. The way a piano is tuned, and thus all Western music is referenced to, if not tuned that way, is kind of a compromise. And you're exactly right. The major thirds are one of the worst offenders.
Yeah.
And we're super sensitive to that interval too. So it really sounds pretty bad on a piano. If you get a chance, it's nice you can have somebody show you that at some point. And it's kind of remarkable that we can, that we kind of let it slide because it's a pretty nasty,
Yeah.
nasty out of tuneness. All the intervals on the piano, except for the octaves, are out of tune in that same way, out of uh, not in tune with nature. You could say um, uh, that's not the best way to put it, but that's not a bad way to put it either. But the major thirds are probably the most noticeable, the most kind of iffy. Um, it's worth noting here. This isn't widely known. Is that system really wasn't adopted until the 19th century. Bach did not write in the tuning we have. He would it was available, he could have, but he did not use it. Even Beethoven didn't tune his piano in the way we have. And I think that he would have been appalled. He would have been absolutely horrified to hear people play his piano pieces, especially in the equal temperament tuning we have now. I think that would have just driven him crazy. But
Well,
maybe a
I'm
Beethoven expert would be a better person to ask about that.
well, I'm glad that you brought up Bach because one thing that people always say about Bach is about how his pieces just so effortlessly go from one key into another key and then back and all over the place. So how could he have possibly done that with something in like that's not equal temperament? It makes no sense to me.
Yeah. So the idea for all of these composers that we've been talking about is that you, so I guess we should say that a G in the key of C is not the same tuning as a G in the key of E flat, for instance.
Right. Yeah.
So if you really wanted things to be in tune, you'd have to have a separate note for each key that you're going to play in. So, you'd have to have 12 times as many keys on the keyboard. Really, really cumbersome. So this system that we use now is equal temperament, where we just divide up everything equally, and it's close enough that you get the gist of it. So it's 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 not perfect, but it definitely works. And this allows us to just play in any key, and all the keys are kind of equally out of tune or equally
Yeah.
fine, or however you want to put it. But the composers, including, well, especially Bach and Beethoven, but even Mozart and Haydn, one of the things they liked using was that the way they tuned their instruments is some of the keys were really out of tune. They really sounded nasty, and some sounded pretty sweet. Most typically, the key of C was like super sweet sounding and really more in tune than it is on our pianos now. But C sharp was like wow, that's really kind of edgy. And they used this. So when they modulated to another key, they wanted it to feel really different. And one of the problems that I think they would have with our music is, you modulate to a distant key on an equal tempered instrument, and it doesn't really sound that different. So um, that's that's really what these people were thinking about. Bach wrote one of his great masterpieces is what's called the well-tempered clavier. Clavier just means keyboard, and sometimes people mistake the fact that the term well-tempered, they think it means equal tempered. It does not. Well
Oh,
temperament is a different thing from equal temperament. And actually, nobody knows how Bach tuned his keyboards.
it's a conspiracy, right?
Right? Yeah, he kept it a secret. And, you know, he had this particular way of tuning them that exactly the way he liked it. In those days, people just kind of tuned their keyboards however. There wasn't much standardization. If you played in church, you just tuned to the organ, however the organ was tuned.
Right.
And but yeah, so he had his own way of tuning, and he wrote the Well Tempered Clavier. There's two different volumes of it. There's a piece in every major and minor key in each volume, prelude and a fugue in each of the 24 keys, and it's kind of to explore the different colors of those keys, especially with this tuning that he used that we wished we knew what it was.
Yeah. It just seems so interesting to me that, like, at such a young, time in your musical, uh, journey, that you were already thinking about these things, because then, like, pretty early on, you ran into Michael Hedges, who is, known for all of his crazy, wacky tunings. And what's I've always been trying to get my head around, because I'm a guitar player, is, like, you see it a lot in the acoustic world, that guys are tuning to open tunings. But that didn't really seem to be the philosophy or the thing that Michael was always usually doing. So I kind of wanted to get more of a perspective for you too, like, working with him and talking with him. Like, how did you guys just approach thinking of crazy tunings? Like, what was the philosophy behind it, or anything like that?
Yeah, it was great meeting Michael because he knew who Harry Parch was. None of my other friends ever did. I tortured them by talking about it a lot and playing Parch's music and so on. But most of them are like, yeah, let's go listen to some Sabbath,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
which is fine. I love Black Sabbath, but yeah, meeting Michael, he knew all this stuff, and so we really hit it off. He also liked Black Sabbath and Harry Parch, and
But also
Bart,
Bartok.
and yeah, he was a huge Talk fan, as am I, and a whole lot of composers that we really liked in common, and we we had this idea that young people have that we wanted to go out there and do something big. We wanted to be the next step. I mean, it seems so pretentious, but that's kind of what you should do as a young person, I guess. And he really he was a little older than I was, and he was pretty already already taking steps in that direction. But he really blossomed over the years that I knew him, and it was amazing to see. He really kind of put together all these different ideas in really interesting ways, and really made it work. Really made it work, which was a thrill to see how much success he had kind of on every level in that process. And the tuning thing was part of that. So let me say this. Hopefully, it'll make sense. Um, when you go to music school, mostly what they teach you is harmony. And the bulk of that is what we call functional harmony. They teach you that these are the chords that are available, and this is how they tend to move, and they move this way because it's uh, uh, kind of telling a story, which is a wonderful thing to understand. But that process is over. The last new things were done 100 years ago,
Right.
mostly by Claude Debussy. And nothing new has happened since then. It's unlikely anything new will happen. I mean, you can do lots of little new things, but in terms of that part of the process, that was an amazing development that happened over 200 years or so in Western music. And so some of us are very interested in looking at other perspectives on the process. And there's a way of thinking about how notes go together that's less about thinking of this is a major chord, this is a minor chord, this is a half diminished chord, than it is about these particular notes have this relationship to each other, and that gives me this particular feeling, and it moves me in a particular way. And so that's kind of where we were coming from. It's a little bit of a, I don't know if you'd want to think of it as kind of a postmodern form of thinking about music theory. In any case, that's where we were coming from. That and it on some levels it's complex. There is a fair amount of math involved. But the important thing about it is, you just tune a guitar to some big, beautiful chord, and it just makes you feel an amazing sensation. And that's what it's all about. That's what it comes down to in the end. There's a lot to study about that, but that's the end result. Is we're looking for these kinds of resonances that really spoke to our experiences at this time and place as who we are in this part of history.
I feel like there's still so much more to like go into in depth with all of that, but I want to keep moving along. To I have so many other things I want to ask you about. So if we could move forward, I wanted to ask you about on some of your compositions you were talking about how you were actually able to have each string go to its own separate output, and how you
Yes.
were panning the strings around, and I think you said that you put the low end off to the side, which goes against everything, every instinct inside of me. It's like the kick has to be in the middle and the bass has to be in the middle. So how did you get onto this, like having the low end on one of the sides?
Yeah, I change it around, and you're actually right. For if you're kind of making, if you're kind of going for a standard way of thinking about things in general, the two low strings sound better here, and then the two high strings kind of out this way. So the two low strings sort of in the middle-ish, and then the higher strings can be further panned out. It is a little weird to have the kick way on the side, but you listen to the old Beatles records, and Ringo's all the way on one side,
Oh,
and so it's not
interesting.
without precedent, and it's not a bad thing. It's just there's different ways of uh, taking part in that experience. Yeah, I got into this because one of the other big trends that actually, I'd just say one of the other big questions that people started asking about music, especially in the 20th century, but even before, was to think about what are the elements of music? What are the the aspects of music that we work with as musicians and composers? Most traditionally, we say those are harmony, melody, timbre, which is tone color, and rhythm. But you don't have to stop there. There are several others that you could consider. And one of the big ones that people thought about is how music exists in space. So the spatiality of music. And this became really important to me too. I had a composer friend when I lived in New York named John Driscoll, and he had been a sculptor and had worked in various media and tried various things and ended up working with sound. He wanted his medium that he worked in to be sound, and wrote this amazing music that's just all about how music exists in space, how sound exists in space. And if you like, I'll describe some of the things he did, but he came up with his own methods for doing things, built a lot of his own equipment to do this. And I was just totally enthralled by his music and this process. And it's something I always wanted to do more with. I've managed to do embarrassingly little with it, but having a separate output for each string, um, that's kind of where this started from, to just be able to process the sound separately. As it turns out, it's it's good for a lot of other things too. Not only can you move things around spatially, it just really makes a lot of sense. And if I could afford it, I would do this all the time. I would process each string separately, um, because it just offers a lot of possibilities for those of you who know a little bit about audio engineering. You can do things like have more reverb on the high notes than the low notes, for instance,
Oh,
so it doesn't
wow.
get
Yeah.
muddy. You can have different, you can tailor the EQ to each string, because, this string is maybe a little twangy and this one's a little boomy. You can have different compression ratios, all kinds of different things that just really help make the music it does end up being a spatial thing. It gives them each part of the music a little bit more of a place in the overall fabric of the mix.
Need to know now. What do you usually? Because I know that you travel a lot of the times. Is you have to travel light,
Yeah.
and yeah. So what is your like broken down bare essentials bass rig look like? Is it a couple of pedals and an amp? Like what are you usually using?
Yeah, that's all I ever get to use is the most basic thing I can possibly stand to use. Occasionally, about once a year, I do a gig with no effects at all and just one bass, just to
Oh wow.
stay in touch with that. But I really like the process of all these other possibilities. So I'm not going to give up on that. I want to stay honest and be able to make music without any of that. But that other stuff is part of the music making process for me. So yeah, for me these days, it's just I just have one pedal. It's a uh, pedal made by the Boss Roland Boss company that's pretty full featured. It does a lot of cool stuff. And if I can bring three basses, I really like to do that. A lot of times I can't, so just one bass and one effects pedal, and it's catch as catch can for amplification. Whatever I can borrow, big or steal,
It's sort
that's what I use. But there's still a lot that can be done with that, um, so I shouldn't complain.
and so do you usually just go straight from your bass right into the pedal, or
Yeah,
yeah?
exactly. Straight from the bass into the pedal, and that at least allows me to do stereo. I can't do multi-string processing uh, the way I'd like to, but at least stereo is, it's a big improvement over mono for the kinds of things I want to do.
Right, right. And then from there, just straight into the amp.
Yes.
Or yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I had to kind of like get it all worked out in my brain because I'm going over my own bass rig right now, and I like to keep it really minimal. So whatever works for you is probably going to work for just about anything I'd ever want to do.
Yeah, it's nice. The gear that's out there nowadays is pretty amazing, actually. I mean, I always want to do, I want it to do more, but
Yeah,
what it does is plenty enough to keep, as you say, keep just about anybody interested for plenty of time.
I was also interested in knowing how you usually approach your practice time. Like, if you know that you only have an hour and a half or 2 hours to practice on something, do you have a way of that you like break down the time so that you know that you kind of touch all the things that you want to work on?
Absolutely. Although it's never enough, that's for sure.
Right.
As I said, I keep a list of these are the things I want to work on. And I think it's up now to like 70 pages or something of small type. So it's a lot of stuff. But I kind of prioritize it. Um, but yeah, I have a kind of a system I use. I'm a little bit obsessed with body mechanics and music. So I really have thought long and hard and researched as much as I can about that process. So I always start with stretching and kind of warming up exercises. I don't really like that term all that much, but that's essentially what it is. I start super slow with just playing, focusing on the simplest things I can think of. So that's usually just playing an open string and trying to get the sound and the feeling and the timing and everything I want just right there. And each finger kind of spending a little bit of time doing that. And then from there, I usually move into working with various exercises in tonalities of some kind, because that's kind of the hardest thing to get together in music. It's not particularly hard to understand, but to kind of master uh, the everything there is about it is really a long process. So that's what I spend a good bit of time on. And then usually um, there's some repertoire I work on, and that just depends on what's coming up. If there's somebody else's music I need to know, then I'll work on that a bit. Or if I'm able to work on my own music, there's always some pieces I'm working on. And yeah, that's it. I usually am only able to practice for about an hour a day and that's I try to break it up in a way that reflects the goals that I have.
I want to know more about how you practice tonality. Is do you like have a drone or something that you kind of play over?
I do a lot of drone work with the fretless, never with the fretted, because it's not as necessary. The fretted uh, has its own way of tuning itself. So with the fretless, I have to tune it, so that I'm always referring to the drone there. Um, but yeah, so um, the goal is really to be able to play any tonal pattern that there that could be played. I mean, that's really the goal. I'm a big improviser, so if you're improvising over, say, a jazz standard, and you see, B minor 7 flat 5, you you know, the goal would be to be able to do any kind of pattern, to play any kind of pattern that I want to play in that tonality, that fits in that tonality in any place on the neck. And so, most typically, what I'll do is I'll pick a tonality that I'll stay in for a few days, maybe 3 days, and I'll pick one place on the neck, and I'll just work through all the possibilities I can think of in that tonality, in that place in the neck. And in the space of an hour, I mean, I can get to very few. I mean, there's probably tens of thousands of possibilities, and I can get through maybe 5 in that time. So there's a lot to work on.
Being a big improviser and then also changing the tunings, like it seems like too much for the brain. You know what I mean? It's like I'm so used to standard tuning now that I'm looking at my instrument and I'm thinking, okay, this is the seventh, this is the fifth, and I'm just thinking about chord tones and what I can put in between them. But when you're improvising, suddenly, you know, can you do that math that fast, or do you find that now you've kind of gone on to like using your ear more than your brain? Did that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. There's definitely that where you use your ear a lot. Um, Standard tuning is a great tuning. It's
It is.
really good, and it's really good for improvisation. If I'm doing a lot of well, it depends. If I'm playing bebop, that's going to be standard tuning, because that's in that kind
Right.
of music. You're improvising and you're moving through a lot of different key centers very quickly. Standard tuning is great for that. But if I'm doing a different kind of improvisation where, say, I'm in one key, like suppose I was in the key of B flat and I'm improvising on, Phrygian dominant kind of tonality. Standard tuning is not really that great for that. It's fine, but it's going to make me think certain ways in that tonality. Whereas if I'm in a different tonality, I could be in a much more B flattish tonality tuning. So if I tune my string, say B flat F, B flat F, then that really gives a lot of richness to the tonic and opened up the relationships very clearly of each note, how each note relates to that tonic very clearly. And since I have two B flat strings and two F strings, it kind of, the patterns are the same on those strings. So in a way, it's better for that. So it depends on the kind of improvisation I'm doing. I don't always make it easy. Sometimes I like to improvise, against the tuning. But most of the time it's to make things sound more rich. It does take a little bit of brain work to restructure yourself. Um, but the patterns are still there. It's a little like switching instruments. So it's a little like going, improvising on a piano as opposed to bass. You're still dealing with the same patterns, but they look a little different. So it's tricky, but it's more a matter of trying to do it in a way that makes sense rather than it's just hard.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Instead of just trying to shoot yourself in the foot all the time.
Exactly. Exactly.
Do you have a few more minutes or just a couple more questions?
Sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a little bit more about your compositional process because, like, writing music, do you find that you ever write things down like in a physical way, or do you usually just kind of like record yourself and like listen back to your ideas? How do you usually go about like writing music?
I would write everything down if I had the time,
Right.
but it takes, I mean, it takes a really long time. I'm pretty fast at it, but still, especially if you're in a weird tuning and, you changing tunings, it gets really, it kind of bogs things down. Um, and I don't have to write things down. I can hear what's happening. It's helpful, it gives you a different perspective on the music. So I would if I could. But yes, in general, it's recording ideas and working through them that way. A lot of times, if I'm working out something structurally, I'll write down uh, either a shorthand, a musical shorthand of what I want to do, or sometimes it's more of a graphical notation process that I'll use. There was a period, especially like in the 70s, when a lot of composers did away with the standard notation that was invented by Guido d'Arezzo, and use it what they call graphical notation, where you're writing the music, but you're using a different way of writing music. So sometimes I'll use that process if that's going to help in the composition.
And sorry about. I know that you teach over the years too, and also with all this touring that you've gone around to a lot of different cultures around the world and seen like different systems of music. And I know that you've learned conical. You talked about Burkina Faso and how I think it was like an interesting 6/8 rhythm that
Yeah.
they. So, what do you think out of all those different cultures and stuff that you've learned? Like, if you could give a student something to just kind of like shake them out of their head and like, hey, just try something completely new, like what kind of really shifted the way you think about music?
You know, Derek, the most psychedelic thing of all is how how music works all over the world and always has, and how integral it is to being human. It's very, very trippy when you keep studying music, and especially when you learn about other cultures. And this process of studying just intonation kind of expands this process. You realize that all humans perceive music in this very particular way. So even though if you listen to music from Pakistan or Korea or something like that, it sounds pretty weird. it, what's weird is how similar it all is. I mean, it's really weird how similar music from all around the world is. And so it does seem like there's some message inside that that's somebody's trying to tell us something, or we're trying to tell ourselves something. It's really hard to pin down what's going on, but obviously it's very important because every culture all over the world has always had music, and that's very bizarre because most of them didn't invent the wheel. They
Yeah.
just dragged stuff along the ground for thousands of years, which you think that would have been a lot more helpful than having music, for instance. Music doesn't seem to have a whole lot of practical value, but no culture seems to have been able to do without it.
Yeah.
So there must be something really important that we're getting from music. And as you kind of study more into these musical structures and how they work, um, you really begin to wonder what's really going on and how it all affects us. I mean, one of the weird things about it is as you learn about music, you're not all you're learning to do is name things. Somebody who knows nothing about music can listen to a set of chord changes and know everything that set of chord changes is telling them. And once you learn about music, you're just learning, oh, this is a major chord and this is a minor seven chord and this is the two chord and this is a five chord. That's all you're learning. You haven't learned, you already knew what that set of chord changes, the story that it was telling you. We're all born with all that stuff. And there doesn't seem to be any particular evolutionary advantage to that. I mean, maybe it's some kind of mathematical overshoot. Um, but it's a very very mysterious process. I guess we don't think about it that much just because it's so close to us. And we do seem to have this unfortunate assumption that music from other cultures is very different from our own. And the opposite is true. It's just completely, totally weird how similar it all is.
That's so interesting for because I was learning just recently about like Kepler and how he had this whole theory with the speeds of orbits of planets, and now we're finding out that like the moons of Jupiter, like the fastest moving one moves about twice as fast as the second fastest moving. Like everything's on these harmonic ratios,
Yeah.
and even weird things like how many times we say the compared to how many times we say of in the English language. And it's not just in English, it's like in every single language. We just kind of, it's like the mathematics is inside of us. So we just have to respond to it. Like we know when there's a bad note. We don't have to go to school to know when we heard a bad
Right.
note.
Right.
So it's just bizarre to think about because I thought you were going to say complete opposite of what you just said. That like, oh yeah, you have to explore the world and you have to go see everything is all very different. But when you say that it's all very the same, it actually makes a lot of sense.
It's kind of odd. I mean, there are differences to be sure, but the real strange thing about it is the unity of it and the kind of clarity of it. I do kind of have this sense that we kind of in in contemporary culture we kind of have the a little bit of a of an odd perspective on what music is and how it works because music has been so successful as a commercial product. Some
Oh,
years ago, I remember seeing I think it was a list of the highest incomes. I think that's what it was in the world. And it was all the people you'd expect, investment bankers and hedge fund people. And Paul McCartney he was on there. I mean, that's how powerful music has been in that process, which I think is a good argument for the importance of music. But we tend to see music in that way as we just that's kind of how we put it, organize everything, and that's really only been a short time. I mean, less than 100 years that music has been perceived that way. It was always perceived in other ways. I mean, every culture has always had music as part of its spiritual practice. So that's certainly there's something to that. I
yeah.
worry that maybe we're kind of losing that a little bit. It's hard to say because anybody can, music can exist in your life in a number of different ways, and they're all great. Um, but I do wonder if we kind of have this general kind of odd perspective on how music works.
Right, right. Because we're now living in this industrial revolutionized world that doesn't really see things in the way that we used to historically, anyway.
Yeah, it's hard to see things in other ways. I mean, it's difficult on a lot of levels, so you can understand how that is. And weird how successful music is in that realm,
Hmm.
as well as lots of other realms too. So it is a mystery.
And in your realm, you've done so many different things over your career. You've done experimental music, you've done jazz, you've done heavy metal, you name it. And like I said, you're just touring the world and getting into Indian classical music and learning about intonation and everything like that. For you, is there anything that you feel like you still want to explore that you haven't had a chance to explore yet?
Actually, Derek, I mean, I feel like I've done so little. I'm kind of embarrassed at how little feel
How
like
can you
I've
say
been able
that?
to.
How could you
Well,
possibly say that?
like just we were talking about spatiality, using spatiality in music, there's so much to do with that, and I've done essentially nothing along those lines. I I am going to try to do there's a system I want to use that's a double stereo system, so it's a little bit more spatial, and that's pretty good actually. I'm pretty happy with that, so I'm hoping to do a show like that later this year, but that'll be the first time I've done it. So things like that, there's so much to do that I just haven't been able to pull off. Once I decided to make my living through music, it does move things in a particular direction. It's been a good thing because it's meant that I've been um, encountered a lot of music that I wouldn't have otherwise, and that's been great. But it does mean that I have to put certain projects on the back burner.
Right. Right, but so it seems like the horizon just keeps moving further as you can increase your view of it, it just keeps moving further, right?
I think so. I think so. It'll be interesting to see how the AI thing shakes out because that could, it could be possible that AI could make all the music that could be can be made within a relatively short period of time. In which case, I'm not sure how that will affect things, but I could see that being a possibility. Um, but yeah, in general, for me, the more I learn about music, the more ideas I have, the more there is to work with.
Well, I gotta wrap this up because we're getting on to about 45 minutes here. So, everyone, you've been listening to The Peach Pit. I've been here talking to Michael Manring. Michael, thank you so much for taking time to talk to me today and take care of yourself.
Oh, thank you so much, Derek. It's been my pleasure. I really appreciate your interest.
Thank you very much.